Y'all have gotten quiet, and now y'all start getting riled up, so we better get started. I don't see anybody else coming through the door. If you will, please open your Bibles up to 2 Samuel chapter 22. 2 Samuel chapter 22. This is kind of a summary of, I guess it's not really a summary, but there are some events here in David's life that are not necessarily given chronologically. We're getting to the end of King David's life, and here are some events and some things that took place, some things we need to know about that are just placed here, but they don't necessarily happen at the end of his life. They may have happened earlier in his life, but they're just added here as we get to the end of his life. Now, in this section, it's been talking about the mighty men of David and how God has been with David through these mighty men. And we talked about some of their feats last time and some of the things they've accomplished. I think it's interesting, so particularly like in chapter 21 and verse 16, where Ishbi-Benob, the giant, thought he could kill David, and it appears he was about to kill David, and then Abishai comes and rescues David and saves him. David grew faint, and he was tired, and it looked like the giant was about to kill David, but Abishai came to his aid and struck the Philistine and killed him. So he saved David's life. But when we get to chapter 22, David begins to praise God for his life being saved. And who does he give credit to? God. Was he right? Yes, he was. And who did God use? That's exactly right. And so I love this connection here, because what we see is the way that David viewed things. David was a man after God's own heart. And the way that David viewed life was that God was in control. God was working. And he saw that in the things that were taking place. He recognized that God had saved his life, and he had used Abishai to do so. So I want to pretty much read this psalm. We haven't talked a lot about the psalms during the life of David, so we're going to kind of go, we'll just make a few points as we go through here, but I just want to see this psalm. These are two psalms that are recorded here at the end of David's life that I think in many ways encapsulate David's heart and David's view towards God. So let's just read a little bit here in Psalm 22. Psalm 22, verse 1, David spoke to the Lord the words of this song on the day when the Lord God had delivered him from the hand of all of his enemies and from the hand of Saul. So he's looking back and he's kind of reminiscing about how God has delivered him through his life, and he says this: The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer, the God of my strength, in him I will trust, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold and my refuge, my Savior. You save me from violence. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. So God is what I depend upon. He's my strength and he's my rock. Now look at the danger that David recognizes that he's been in. Verse 5. When the waves of death encompassed me and the floods of the ungodly made me afraid, the sorrows of Sheol surrounded me, the snares of death confronted me. In my distress, I called upon the Lord, and I cried to my God. He heard my voice from his temple, and my cry entered his ears. So when everything was against me, you remember there were several times in David's life where David would even say, there was but a step between me and death. There were times where he was surrounded by Saul's men, and right at the last minute, as Saul was coming around the corner of the mountain about to see him and capture him, Saul receives a message, and he has to turn back and go take care of a problem. There were just a number of occasions like that, and what David's doing is he's looking back and he's saying, when death was just reaching and has its grip on me, then God delivered me. And that was exactly right. Look at verse 8, talking about God's power and how God responds to David's cry. And I want you to pay attention to this language, because I think when we understand this language here, it will help us to appreciate this type of language when we get over in passages like Matthew 24, where a lot of people think that it's talking about the end of the world, or in the book of Revelation, where people say, this is what it's going to be like at the end times. But notice how David uses this language. We know the type of things that David is talking about here. He's talking about times that God rescued him. But look at the language that he uses. Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the heaven moved and shook, because he was angry. Smoke went up from his nostrils, and a devouring fire from his mouth. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens also, and came down, and with darkness under his feet. He rode upon a cherub, and flew, and he was seen upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness canopies around him, and dark waters and thick clouds of the sky. From the brightness before him, coals of fire were kindled. The Lord thundered from heaven. The Most High uttered voices. He sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning bolts, and he vanquished them. And the channels of the sea were seen, and the foundations of the world were uncovered at the rebuke of the Lord and the blast of his breath of his nostrils. All right. Did those things literally happen? No. But what's it describing? His power. David says, God, you're able to deliver me. And I cried to you, and you responded. And so he's just talking about God's power. God's power was just as much at work when a message came to Saul saying, hey, you need to come take care of this problem right now. It's urgent. And Saul says, okay. And he leaves when he was just about to catch David. And so when we see that type of language, particularly in the Psalms, we need to understand that's poetic, that's figurative poetic language describing God's power. When we're familiar with that in the Psalms and in the Old Testament, which the New Testament writers assumed we would be, Jesus assumed that we would know this. John, when he writes the book of Revelation and Jesus reveals that message, would assume we would be familiar with this type of language. Then when we read those things, we understand something about God's power there, and we're not necessarily looking for coals to come flying out of God's mouth and smoke out of his nostrils and lightning bolts to come and make the sea where all the water comes out of it. And so that's important. We're learning how to read the Bible as we go through. Would you have anything you'd like to add? Anybody else have anything you'd like to add at this point?
The way that that's worded and all the other places that is worded, like even in Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelations, stuff that Jesus spoke of. If you get to reading about when a lot of people heard it, they heard, but they didn't have ears. They saw, but they didn't actually see what was going on. And even when Christ was talking to Nicodemus, saying, here you are a leader, but you don't understand spiritual things. And a lot of the wording is so that the righteous, no matter when they read it, they understand it. But the world, when they read it, they actually see all these figurative things and they go, wow, how did this happen? How did this happen? But it is to confuse the enemy.
Yeah.
But it's actually to inspire the righteous.
Right. So what's the key that the righteous have to figure out what's being said?
Well, it's because they studied the Word.
Exactly.
And it was revealed through them when they read, because when you actually read the Word, God's speaking to you. So
here's the thing I think, particularly, and I know we're getting off on a tangent here a little bit, but people are fascinated. I don't know how many YouTube suggestions that I have about right now the war between Israel and Hamas. The Bible talks about this being the signs that are coming at the end of the world. Well, it very well may be right before Christ's return. I don't know. But people have been saying that for 2,000 years about different things. Everything points to that. And what people love to do is they get fascinated with that. They want to jump to the book of Revelation. By the way, where does Revelation fall in the Bible? It's the last book. How many books do you pick up and start with the last chapter? Not many. You don't know what's going on if you start with...
Probably the only one.
Probably so. You start at the beginning and read through, and then you understand what's going on by the end. And I do think that that's a big difference. People get excited, they go to the book of Revelation, and they come up with all kinds of fanciful ideas because they don't understand the type of language because they didn't start at the beginning of the book and work their way through. All right, let's go a little further here with this. Look at verse 18. God delivered me from my strong enemy, from those who hated me, for they were too strong for me. Have you ever seen many of the records left by kings of ancient history? Well, if you were to read a lot of the records left by kings, like the Assyrian kings or the Babylonian kings or the Egyptian pharaohs, when they talk about their life and what happened, they don't say things like, my enemies were strong. As a matter of fact, they were too strong for me. They don't say that. They say, I am a mighty conqueror. I defeated all of my enemies. I crushed them. They don't talk about, actually, I was too weak. I was too weak to defeat them. But David does. David acknowledges that. And then he comes back and he says, they confronted me in the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my support. And he brought me out into a broad place. He delivered me because he delighted in me. So you have this picture that David has of things, and he's like, I'm not the strongest. There are others that are stronger than me. It's not by my might, but the Lord has delivered me. I cried to him, and he heard me, and he was able to deliver me. Now, I want you to notice in verse, if you want to take a section of this, you're welcome to. You want me to just keep rattling on? Okay. You jump in and interrupt me. I don't know. Anybody else interrupt me anytime you'd like on that. So, verse 21. The Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands. He has recompensed me. I have kept the ways of the Lord. I have not wickedly departed from my God, for all of his judgments were before me, and his statutes, and I did not depart from them. I was also blameless before him, and I kept myself from my iniquity. Therefore, the Lord has recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my eyes. We mentioned this, I believe, last class. What is a little troubling to you about that section? Yeah, David sinned with Bathsheba, committed adultery, had her husband murdered, and you look at this and say he was blameless, he was clean. What David is describing here is he's describing that, yes, he did those things. I don't think he would deny that. But those were uncharacteristic in his life. That his relationship with God, and the reason that he could cry out to God, and the reason that God would listen to his cry and deliver him, is because as a whole, David was a man that sought to follow God, sought to be pleasing to God. He strove for that end. And so as he's talking about, why would God deliver me? Why would he look upon me? Well, because I've tried to submit to him. I've tried to be obedient to him and follow him. And so verse 26, he sums it up by saying, with the merciful, you, God, will show yourself merciful. With the blameless man, you will show yourself blameless. With the pure, you will show yourself pure. With the devious, you will show yourself shrewd. You will save the humble people, but your eyes are on the haughty that you may bring them down. We've talked about this theme throughout the Scripture. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, but whoever humbles himself will be exalted. And David recognized that. And David said, the reason that you've exalted me, God, is because I've humbled myself before you.
Well, every time that David was wrong, he repented and then asked God to forgive him.
That's right.
When you look at other characters in the Bible, when they sin, they didn't go to God. They didn't repent. And then they died as a sinner.
That's right. Verse 29. For you are my lamp, O Lord. The Lord shall enlighten my darkness. For by you I can run against a troop. By my God I can leap over a wall. As for God, his ways are perfect. The word of the Lord is proven. He is a shield to those who trust in him. For who is God except the Lord? Who is a rock except God? God is my strength and my power. He makes my way perfect. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He sets me on high places. He teaches my hand to make war so that my arm can bend a bow of bronze. Again, now he's about to talk about the victories that he has. Who does he say has taught him and gave him the ability to win these victories? The Lord has. You have also given me the shield of your salvation, and your gentleness has made me great. You enlarge my path under me so that my feet do not slip. Now I want you to notice this. I have pursued my enemies and destroyed them. Neither did I turn back again till they were destroyed. I have destroyed them and wounded them so that they would not rise. They have fallen under my feet. You listen to that and you say, now that sounds like some of the kings of ancient world that we know about. But I don't think that's what he's doing here, because look at the next verse. For you have armed me with strength for the battle. You have subdued under my feet those who rose against me. You have also given me the necks of my enemies, so that I destroyed those who hated me. I want to make a point here that I think is important. It seems that you have two extremes that people want to go to. One extreme is to say, I'm going to, by my strength, my wisdom, my might, I'm going to be victorious. What's wrong with that?
God, you can't do that.
That's right. You're not that big and bad. You can't. You're flesh and blood. The other is, well, I'm not going to do anything. God will just take care of it. That's not the position that God gave us either. God expects us to participate with Him in the work that He's given us to do. Let me say it again. God expects us to participate together with Him in the work that He's given us to do. He will equip us and give us the power. But He expects us to step up and do what we can do. And that's exactly what David is describing here. That he had worked together with God, and by God's power, he was able to be successful in that. Think of he calls Moses, Moses, I want you to go and speak to Pharaoh. Moses says, who am I? God says, I will be with you. You've got to step up and do this, but I will be with you and I will support you. All the prophets, same thing. Paul, same thing. All the way through. That's the same for you as well. Jesus is not going to do the work without you putting forth the effort. But you can't do it by yourself. But you can participate. He's invited you to participate with Him in that great work. And so we have to be willing to rise to the call that He has given us. Walk worthy of the calling with which you were called.
Well, the story that's actually brought up in the New Testament is exactly if you don't do nothing, it'll be taken away from you.
That's right. Very good. Excellent.
Because when all the talents was given out, the one said, oh, you're a real strenuous master. He went and dug and hid his talent. And when he come back, everybody had double theirs, and he'd give them more. And then when he come to the one, he said,
you wicked and lazy servant. That's right. Good point. That's a good illustration of that.
Not only has God worked through David in this way, but last class period we talked about David's mighty men, and we covered some of those stories, and some of those feats we talked about compares with modern day Marvel characters and what they accomplished. It was just unreal. And yet here we see, as we talked about then, the source behind the ability, the power, the greatness. It was God that was working through these men.
Absolutely. Very good. All right, let's drop down here just a little bit. Look at verse 47 through 51, and then we'll conclude this psalm. The Lord lives. Blessed be my rock. Let God be exalted, the rock of my salvation. Does that sound familiar to any of you? We sing a song that's worded very similar to that. It's taken from this. It is God who avenges me, who subdues the people under me, who delivers me from my enemy. You also lift me up above those who rise against me. You have delivered me from the violent man. Therefore, I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the Gentiles. I sing praises to your name. He is the tower of my salvation. He is the tower of salvation to his king, who shows mercy to his anointed, to David and to his descendants forevermore. So as David summarizes his life, he says, the reason that I'm in this position that I'm in is because I've trusted in God. I've trusted in God, and I've worked with Him. And that's the reason why I am what I am. And that's true of any of us. All right. Chapter 23 says, these are the last words of David. I don't think these were, as David was on his deathbed, I don't think these were the last things that came out of his mouth. I think this is probably one of the last psalms, probably the last psalm that David wrote and recorded. And so, thus says David, the son of Jesse, thus says the man raised on high, the anointed of God of Jacob, the sweet psalmist of Israel. And I think that gives us a clue. This was David's last psalm, the sweet psalmist of Israel. The Spirit of the Lord spoke by me, and His word was on my tongue. Was David a prophet? Yes, he was.
His prophecy is what God actually gave to him since he was the anointed one. I mean, he was things that he told come from God.
That's right.
He was actually prophesying through God.
That's
I'm not sure that David always knew that it was. Many of the Psalms seem to be Psalms that had dual meanings. David describing his current circumstances, but at the same time, it was foretelling, prophecy, especially messianic prophecy. So I don't know that at that point in time, David knew that, the word of the Lord was spoke by him, but at this late time, he does.
That's right. That's exactly right. And even at this time, David may not have understood everything that was revealed by the word, but through the word of the Lord, but he knew that the word of the Lord was speaking through him. In his Psalms, that these are inspired. These came from God. And so the Spirit of the Lord spoke by me. His word was on my tongue. The God of Israel said, the Rock of Israel spoke to me. He who rules over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. So here's what God says. He who rules over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. Did David rule over men? Yes. And David took note. God says those who rule over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. He shall be like the light of the morning when the sun rises, a morning without clouds, like the tender grass springing out of the earth by clear shining after the rain. So the one who rules justly by the fear of the Lord, he will bring refreshment to a nation. He will be light to the people. But then look at the next thing that David says. Although my house is not so with God. Does anybody render that differently? What does yours say?
Truly is not my house so with God.
Okay, so here's the difficulty in translating this. Is David saying, "Yep, that's the way that I am," or is he saying, "I haven't exactly lived up to that"? That's the dilemma here. If he's saying that, "Yep, that's the way that I am," then he can go on and say, "And that's the reason why God's blessed me." If he's saying, "I haven't exactly lived up to that," the way the New King James words it is, "Although my house is not so with God, yet he has made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things and secure."
Well, before we go any further, I would almost add to this. You could almost say yes to both of those in a sense.
Yes.
Because although on a personal level, that house hasn't went as well as he would have expected. You look at Israel as a nation. They have prospered. When you think about when Moses gives the blessings and warnings in Deuteronomy to the people, do you remember what the blessings were based upon? If you obey his voice, if you do his will, if you're obedient to what he says, then all these blessings will be bestowed on you. And after Joshua's time and the elders, that we haven't seen really good times in Israel until now. Yeah. Especially like under Saul, we've seen the land actually shrink in what was occupied by Israel. We've seen the land in constant turmoil, under constant threat throughout the judges under Saul. But under David, he's restored the land. He's brought balance and stability to the nation of Israel. And they are prospering like they haven't since they first conquered the land.
That's right.
So, nationally, yes, but his own household is a different story.
Yeah. Do you feel like, the blessings that are coming to David, right? What's probably the greatest blessing? 2 Samuel chapter 7, what's the greatest blessing that God has promised David? The Messiah is going to come through David. And did David come from a notable family? No. He was a shepherd. God raised him up to be king. Made him rule, gave him great success, promised that he would build a house, an enduring house. The Messiah is going to come through David. Did David deserve that? No. David did live by faith, but he didn't deserve all that. And so either way, whichever translation is accurate on, or I would say this, whichever is correct, or whatever in the original text, both of these are equal, and that's what makes it difficult to translate, because you're saying, well, it could be this, and that would be true, or it could be this, and that would also be true. And so David was a man after God's own heart, but David was not perfect, and David recognizes that. But what David says here is that God's made an everlasting covenant with me. He's ordered all things to secure. For this is all my salvation and my desire. In other words, that God God has blessed me in this way. Will he not make it increase? And then he talks about in verse 6 and 7, but those who rebel against God, those who are contrary to God, they will be destroyed. They'll be utterly burned up in fire. Verse 7.
Well,
Yes, sir.
David was a human being, just like we are. That's why when he made mistakes and everything, he asked forgiveness. But a human being makes mistakes. I don't care who they are.
Yeah,
And God knows that.
that's right.
That's why he set up forgiveness for us.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Any other thoughts through David's last Psalms here?
You know, one thing you said that God showed him that the Messiah was going to come through it. But a lot of people don't understand when Christ was actually born from Mary and Joseph. Because Joseph was in the line of David and Mary was in the line of David. But God had to do it that way because the world thinks that the man is the descendant line instead of the woman. But all Joseph was an earthly dad. Mary was the mother and God was the father. But it actually proved the prophecy that it came through the line of David. But a lot of the historians, when they look at it, they go, well, Jesus come from Joseph. They don't actually give the recognition that he's actually from God.
Yeah. So the way that God designed it so that you covered both the legal heir and also the blood line. And that's right. All right, what I want to do now is I want us to jump over to 1 Chronicles. To 1 Chronicles chapter 21. And we're going to look at the Chronicles account of this. This is also covered in 2 Samuel chapter 24. But we're going to look at just the Chronicles account. We may make a few comments of what is revealed in the 2 Samuel account. This is, I don't know when this took place in David's life. I don't know how early or late it was in his reign that this took place. But this is another major blunder that David makes. We were talking about David being a human being and making mistakes. Here's one of the mistakes that he made. And so what vices have we seen in David so far? So we've seen lust. We've seen fear. I think that's the reason why he had Uriah killed, was because he was afraid of being found out on that. What else? Can you think of anything else? We almost saw wrath and vengeance, but Abigail calmed him down before he had an opportunity to do that. So we're seeing in David a lot of the mistakes that we see in ourselves.
If indecisiveness is a sin,
That's right.
We've seen that in his own family.
That's right. Very good. Yeah. That's good. Well, we're about to see another one here, and this would be pride. And we haven't really seen this in David very much. Maybe you could say with the situation with well, I just went blank on his name. No, the guy Nabal. Yeah, Nabal. Maybe that was pride, that his ego was hurt because Nabal didn't invite him to the feast after he cared for Nabal's stuff. But I don't think that was exactly pride. But this seems to be pride here. Let's look at what happens here. 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 1. Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number the people. Now, the Hebrew word here for Satan just means the opponent, the adversary. And but it probably is what we normally think of as Satan. He is our adversary. He's tempting us all the time to do something. And so what he does here is he ends up doing a lot of damage to Israel by tempting David to sin. To number the people. What's wrong with numbering people?
God didn't want them numbered except when he told them to be numbered, because he didn't want them to put their faith in how many people they had to go to war, because he was going to handle whatever battle it is. And with them out not knowing how many men is ready to fight and all that, it's just like today. I mean, you take a Pentagon and we know how many forces we got. By knowing that and how much weapons we got, we know what kind of odds we got. But if you're a king and you don't know how many, you got to trust in God because you don't know if you got enough. But He says, go, go.
That's right. So you think about, we've got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. The book of Numbers is the numbering of the people. But as Steve said, God said, number the people. He numbered them when they left Egypt. He numbered again right before they went into the Promised Land. What was the significance of God having them number them those two times?
Well, you told us to make a great nation the first time, so to show how great a nation they were.
All right. Very good.
Well, the Indians were like, well, not how many fighting men they had to take the land.
Okay.
I think if they numbered them the second time was to show, well, so they would know how to divide the land. But that's the reason they did it.
All right. So that last point, I think, is exactly right. So they would know because they cast lots depending on who had the bigger tribe that had more land. But also, do you remember that how many of that first numbering was included in that second numbering? 2. Yeah, what happened to the rest? Did God say that would happen? And that second numbering proved that God was exactly right. Not only 2, Joshua and Caleb were the only 2 that didn't die in the wilderness, just as God said. And so there was purpose in that, significance in that. What David is doing here is what Steve talked about, and that is, look what a mighty king I am. Look at the great army that I have. And he was kind of trusting that. Now, does that sound like David? We just saw a psalm where David said, the Lord is my refuge. He's my shield. And so this is another one of those times where David acts uncharacteristically in this.
Moment of weakness.
A moment of
And
weakness.
We all have that.
That's right.
We all have that.
So Satan moves him to do this. So David said to Joab and the leaders of the people, go, number Israel from Beersheba to Dan, and bring the number of them to me that I may know it. And Joab responds, may the Lord make his people 100 times more than they are, but my lord the king, are not all of my Lord's servants? Are they not all my Lord's servants? Why then does my Lord require this thing? Why should he be a cause of guilt in Israel? And so what he's saying here is, David, don't do this. Don't do this. The Lord will take care of us. May the Lord increase us or whatever, but don't do this. Don't make this mistake. Does David listen on this occasion? David listens many times, but he does not listen on this occasion. He listened to Abigail. He's not willing to listen to Joab. And so it says the king's word prevailed against Joab. Therefore Joab departed and went throughout all of Israel and takes account, and he comes back and he gives the sum of the number of the people to David. And in 1 Chronicles 21, it said that Israel had 1,100,000 men who drew the sword, and Judah had 470,000 men who drew the sword. If you look at the account in 2 Samuel, the numbers are different. And this is one of, Gerald and I were talking about this beforehand. This is one of those places where I don't know a simple explanation that resolves the difference here. Most scholars that I've looked at say this is probably one of those occasions where the numbers were not copied correctly in one account or the other, and therefore we have this discrepancy here. And so you may find a better answer than that, but I don't know of a better answer at this particular point. Now, big number. Interestingly, verse 6 and 7, verse 6 rather, did Joab number everybody? Didn't David say go number everybody?
Typical Joab.
Yeah, Joab says no. Why? Why did Joab not number everybody?
It's a command with a point.
Yeah, he didn't like the command. And so that's exactly right. Joab was not just a really loyal servant. It was like he kind of did what he wanted to do. And here he's like, I'm not numbering everybody. And so he didn't. He didn't number Levi or Benjamin.
You know, I wonder up to this point, if this follows the narrative as we've been covering it, I wonder, like in times past, David has heeded Joab's advice, his counsel and whatnot. This time he doesn't. I wonder if it's that, you know, Joab has fallen out of grace that much with David up to this point that he's not going to listen to anything else he has to say.
Yeah. We know
It may not be. I don't know, but I think it's a strong possibility.
Yeah.
It has two discrepancies in the text. Because there are some
Yeah,
round up, some people round down.
maybe. That may be.
They keep that file there with you.
Yeah, you keep it.
The notation that you had that the numbers don't match. Joab's numbers where he left them out, and the other one might actually had the
Maybe.
whole numbers is where the discrepancy. It ain't the transition of typing it down. It's
Right.
Joab left these people out on purpose.
Maybe. Maybe. But how does God feel about this? Verse 7. He was displeased with this thing, and therefore he struck Israel. So we're about to hear how he struck Israel on this.
So is verse 7 like a summary of picking up with verse 14?
I think so. Yeah, I think
That's
so.
kind of the way I took it. It's not like he's, if we're following, again, the narrative, it gives a summary, but it's really not happened yet. It's
Right.
going to begin to happen
Yeah,
in verse 14.
That's right. Yeah, we could end at verse 7, and we've got the idea of what
Right.
takes place. Now we're about to get some of the details about how that took place. Yeah. So verse 8, David, by the way, in 2 Samuel it says that after David did this, his heart smote him. His conscience smote him. And he said, God, I've sinned. I've sinned. Please forgive my sin. And God said to David, here in verse 8, David says, I've sinned greatly because I've done this, but now I pray, take away my iniquity from your servant, for I've done foolishly. And the Lord spoke to David through Gad, the seer, saying, go tell David, saying, thus says the Lord, I offer 3 things. Choose one of them for yourselves. Now think about if God says, all right, I'm going to let you have a choice here. Here are your choices. First, the first choice is 3 years of famine. Your second choice is 3 months to be defeated by your enemies. Your third choice is 3 days of plague in the land, with the angel of the Lord destroying throughout all the territory of Israel. Now, consider what answer I should take back to the Lord.
All of it's bad.
All of them is bad. All of them is bad. Now, let me ask you this. This is interesting because I look at it and I think the way David thought about this and maybe the way that I would think about this. Which would you rather face? Would you rather face nature? Would you rather face man? Or would you rather face God as an opponent or an enemy?
None of it.
Yeah, there's not a good choice here.
Because, even if you're doing nature, you take 3 years. If you're not able to get any food supply from any other nation,
It's disastrous.
it's going to wipe out millions of people.
Yeah, it's disastrous.
And then if you choose the nations to overtake you don't know how bad they're going to whoop you when they come in and how many millions that they're going to kill.
That's right.
And then if you say, I want the angel of the Lord, it tells in there where one angel killed several 100,000 just one night. So
they're all bad choices. And so I look at it and I think I would say, well, I sure don't want to face God because God can do anything.
That's what I'm thinking. What is he capable of?
Yeah. He cannot just destroy the body, he can destroy the soul in hell. And so, I don't know. But David looks at this and David thinks differently about it. And here's how David responds. David said, I'm in great distress. There's no good choice here.
Both versions have that.
Yes.
That statement.
Yeah.
I am in great distress.
This is a no-win situation. But here's what he says. Please let me fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are very great, but do not let me fall into the hand of man. So David knows very well that yes, God is the strongest, most powerful. He can be the most destructive of all of these. But he also knows something else about God. What is that? Merciful. Nature's not very merciful. Man is not very merciful. God can be merciful. And so he says, let me fall into the hands of God.
I think that's what separates David from me.
Yeah.
Because I look at God's justice and what he's capable of, but David looks at his mercy and what he's capable on that end.
Yeah.
And, I think that gives you some insight into the heart of David.
That's right. So the Lord sent a plague upon Israel, and 70,000 men fell. Now, I want to point this out. In 2 Samuel account, it says that the Lord was angry with Israel. In other words, Israel had done something to provoke God's wrath that it's not recorded. God uses David's sin on this occasion to punish Israel in that. And so we kind of have two things going on here. We have David's sin, and David is being punished for that, but also Israel's being punished for some sin that's not declared here. So 70,000 men fell. God sent the angel, and it was coming over the city of Jerusalem. And it says, as he was destroying, the Lord looked and relented of the disaster. For he said to the angel who was destroying, it is enough. Now restrain your hand. And the angel of the Lord stood by the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. So sure enough, David was right. God is merciful. And God says, it's enough. The plague had destroyed enough, and he stops. So here is the angel over the threshing floor of Ornan, looking over Jerusalem. David lifts his eyes. He sees the angel of the Lord, and between heaven and earth, having his hand on a drawn sword stretched over Jerusalem. David and the elders clothed in sackcloth. What does that tell you? They were in mourning and repentance. They fell on their faces, and David said to God, was it not I who commanded the people to be numbered? Am I the one? I am the one who sinned and done this indeed, but these are sheep. What have they done? Let your hand, I pray, O Lord, my God, be against me and my father's house, but not against your people, that they should be plagued. And so David says, look, don't punish them. Now, God was punishing them for something else, I think. But David realizes, but I'm the cause of this at this point. At least I've brought about this. And don't punish the people, punish me. That's the spirit he should have. And that seems in line with David's character here. Then,
as I'm reading this, the way this describes the angel of the Lord and all this as it unfolds, it almost appears to me that it looks like God has pressed the pause button.
Mm-hmm.
Because the angel of the Lord, what has he still got drawn? The sword. But he doesn't sheathe it until what? What happens? What has to occur before he sheathes it? Yeah, the atonement has to be offered. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's over with at this point until David moves forward in what God is seeking here. I think the pause button has simply been hit at this point.
So David asks, please let it be on me. And God takes this occasion to tell David, go and erect an altar of the Lord on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Now this story is being told for a reason. We'll get to that in a second. But go and set up an altar there on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. So David, I'm going to summarize this because we're running out of time. But by the way, it's interesting here the way this is worded. Ornan and his 4 sons are at the threshing floor and they're threshing wheat. The angel of the Lord comes. They see it. What do the 4 sons of Ornan do? The sensible thing to do, run. They flee. What does Ornan do? He goes back to threshing.
This is an old timer.
This is an old timer. And so David and his men fall on their face, and the elders fall on their face. His sons run for cover, and he continues threshing. David comes, and when he sees David come, he comes to David, and he falls down before David. And Ornan says to David, what can I do for you? And David says, grant me the place of the threshing floor, that I may build an altar to the Lord, and I'll pay you whatever is fair. And Ornan said, you just take it. Take it, build your altar. As a matter of fact, here, the oxen that I'm using to thrash with, sacrifice them. You can use the implements, the threshing implements, to burn for wood, and just take care of that. And how does David respond?
Don't take it for free, he wants to buy it.
That's right. I will not offer to the Lord that which I paid nothing for. And no, this is my sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice if it doesn't cost you anything. And David said, this is my sacrifice. It will cost me something. And so he paid him 600 shekels of gold by weight. And David built an altar there, and he offered burnt offerings and peace offerings and called on the Lord. Did the Lord approve? How do you know? woof, fire comes down, consumes the sacrifice. We've seen that on a few occasions. That is a telltale sign that God is pleased with your offering. And so David is back in favor with the Lord. As you said, the atoning sacrifice has been offered here. And then the Lord commanded the angel to return the sword to its sheath. And so David saw that this was the case. By the way, Ornan the Jebusite, what's a Jebusite? That's right. He was the original inhabitant before before the Israelites came in and took over Canaan. That's right. Now, David didn't go to the tabernacle to offer sacrifice on this occasion. That was in Gibeon, and he couldn't get there because of the angel of the Lord. But I want you to notice chapter 22 in verse 1. I'm sorry, I've been neglecting this. Okay, I need to know where this, so here's Jerusalem, here's David's palace. Ornan's threshing floor would have been right up here on Mount Moriah. Anybody remember anything that happened in Mount Moriah in the history? Abraham. That's where Abraham was commanded to go to offer Isaac. Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah. That is where Ornan's threshing floor was. God told David to go there and erect an altar. David buys that piece of property, sets up an altar there, and I want you to notice chapter 22, verse 1. David said, "This is the house of the Lord God, and this is the altar of burnt offering for Israel." What does he say? This is where the temple is going to be. Has God had a temple up to this point? No. David wanted to build one. God said, "You can't build one. Your son will build one." This is where it's going to be built. The same place that Isaac was offered as an offering is where the offerings will be offered from here on in Israel's history. This is how David acquires that property. This is how the temple site was collected. If you go to Israel today in Jerusalem and you go to the Dome of the Rock, which is a Muslim mosque there, that will be the location that Solomon's temple was built. Ornan's threshing floor, Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah.
Technically, there was a temple before then. The one that they took around and assembled and moved each time.
Yeah.
And then when this was built, it was built after the portal.
Right. That's right. That's right. All right. Thank you for your good attention. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.